Hi, I'm Old Norse Specialist Dr. Jackson Crawford. One of the greatest heroes in the sagas of mythical Norse heroes is Hrólfr Kraki, or Hrólfr Ladderface, you could call him based on what his nickname means. This is a legendary Danish king, also mentioned, although only as the nephew of Hrothgar in the Old English poem Beowulf. Now, the Saga of Hrólfr Kraki, my translation of which will appear together with the Saga of Hervor and Haethrak in my next planned book from Hackett Publishing. The saga is not the only source we have for his story from the Middle Ages. I mentioned the very brief noticing of him in Beowulf, but also Saxo Grammaticus in his Latin language history of the Danes, Gesta Danorum, mentions well, not just mentions Hrólfr Kraki, but actually details his life in almost as much flesh as the Icelandic saga does. And though it's in Latin, it contains a translation into Latin of what must have been an Old Norse poem based on the events in the last battle of Hrólfr Kraki and his champions, including Bőðvarr, Bjarki, and Hjalti. And we have an interesting exchange during this Latin poem. The Old Norse original, the putative Old Norse original, is called Bjarkamal, although it's not preserved in Old Norse. That goes like this, as translated by Fisher. Bjarki says, in the middle of a battle, "But now, where is the one whom the people call Óðinn, powerful in arms, content with a single eye? Tell me, Ruta, is there anywhere you can spy him?" Now, Ruta is his wife. And she says, "Bring your gaze nearer and look through my arm akimbo. You must first hallow your eyes with the sign of victory to recognize the war god safely face to face." And now for war god, which he actually says in the Latin is Martem, the accusative singular of Mars. So Odin is being equated to that Roman god. Very typical for Roman writers. Not Roman writers, Latin language writers. Now compare this to what he says in chapter 51 of Hrolf's saga. This is my translation of the Old Norse. "I do not believe that I recognize Óðinn here, but I have a strong feeling of his presence somewhere near, that foul and treacherous son of evil. If someone does tell me where he's at, I'll beat him like any other low-down, vile rodent. That damn poisonous vermin will be badly treated if I get my hands on him." Now, this may seem surprisingly negative, but it's actually probably fairly tame for the way that an Old Norse believer in these gods might have talked about Odin. The Norse often seem to be henotheistic rather than just plain polytheistic. Henotheistic meaning that one believes in multiple gods but favors one. And of course the most favored god must have been Thor, the judge by how popular places and people named after him are. The wearing of Thor's hammer pendants, much as metalheads do today, although we find hundreds of those in graves, which speaks to probably a belief in his protection or hallowing of the grave or the dead man, or the living man perhaps when he wore it. And we see Odin criticized in many different places in the poems of the Poetic Edda. For instance, in Hrollsbrother, stanza 25, Thor says, "You deal out victory and defeat unfairly if you have so much power over battles." And in Lokasenna 22, Loki says to Odin, "Silence, Odin, you always judge battles unfairly for humans. You have often given defeat to the better side when you shouldn't have." But there's more going on here than just a little bit of criticism of Odin because of how he determines battles will turn out. There seems to be a really strong antagonism between the character of Bőðvarr, Bjarki, and Odin, both in the Latin and in the Old Norse version. Now, of course, both of these written stories about Hrólfr Kraki and his champions date from the Christian era and are written by Christians, and both sort of broadly criticize the pagan faith of their forebears. But it's interesting that in addition to being so critical of Odin in the Bjarkamal poem translated into Latin in Saxo's work, we have this strange talk about how to look at Odin. Look through my arm akimbo, Ruta says. You must first hallow your eyes with the sign of victory. In Latin, that's ante sacraturus victrici lumini signo. What is with looking through the arm akimbo? We're not quite sure, but often magic in different cultures involves looking at the world in a somewhat different way, literally. Looking through engineered circumstances, whether through, the strange little window between your arm and your chest when your arm is akimbo, or looking through particular finger gestures, things like that. And the sign of victory, we don't quite know what that is. It's possible that it's the rune Tyr, which is named for the god Tyr, but it's impossible to say for sure because in spite of what gurus will tell you today, we don't know the symbolic meanings of the runes in the Middle Ages. We only know their uses as letters. So, and how does one hallow one's eyes, right? Do you have to touch your eyes while you're making this? Do you have to draw it on your eyelids or something like that? It's not really very clear at all. But whatever this is, it probably actually goes back to a pre-Christian antagonism between Óðinn and Bőðvarr Bjarki. And in that case, what may be going on is that since Óðinn is so magically proficient, one has to take steps if one is his enemy to look upon him in such a way that he can't curse you. I think that's probably what's going on in that translated portion of Bjarkamal, but I can't say for sure. And I can only point out that at other times when Óðinn appears in the sagas, it seems like human beings can look at him normally and interact with him normally. Although, of course, usually they don't know it's him. Usually they just see an old man dressed in gray, the wide-brimmed hat, and one eye. Well, I hope this has been somewhat interesting for you. And if you enjoy these videos about Norse language and myth made for free in beautiful places in my Rocky Mountain homeland, I hope you'll check out the more than 300 other videos on this channel. I also hope you'll take a look at The Wanderer's Hávamál, my new translation of Hávamál that includes the Old Norse text and a commentary, as well as my Patreon, where people's generous monthly donations help me continue making these videos. For now, from beautiful Colorado, let me wish you all the best.